My name is Martin Hultman. I'm associate professor working at the Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. My background or my skill sets as a researcher is that I've been studying energy and climate and environmental politics and systems for 20 years. And among else, I've been writing and publishing books, not least about environmental history of Sweden and energy and climate history in the 1960s, 1970s and 1980s in these two books. Also focusing in on climate issue and the climate debate around 2006 to 2009 in Sweden. I have a very interdisciplinary background. Sometimes I speak about it as supra-disciplinary. So I move in between environmental history, environmental sociology, gender studies, and also influenced by other disciplines to focus and narrow down on specific research questions, and also finding kind of solutions to the problems that we see that comes out from the research. The last 5 or 6 years or so, I've been fortunate to have 2 larger research projects going on and 2 accompanying research groups. So one of them is regarding the question, how can we have this knowledge about climate change and us burning fossil fuels and creating greenhouse gases for such a long time, over 30 years, and not have acted enough on that knowledge. So I lead a Center for Studies of Climate Change Denial in Sweden. And in various ways, we are trying to explain this inaction on this political inaction on climate science. So one of the books I've written there is this one called Upphettning in Swedish, Democracy in the Climate Crisis. It's in Swedish, but there are some accompanying, there are some articles in English there as well. But I will speak today more about the other research group that I lead, the research group which are studying gender aspects in energy and environment, and not least climate issues and politics. And I specialize there in the issues of masculine norms and masculinities and male behavior and structures in connection to manliness, and because ecofeminists has for over 40 years shown that within the environmental politics field and climate and energy also, women tend to take knowledge and risks up to a much higher degree. They tend to act upon those knowledges and risks as well in much higher degree than men. I'm not that interested in that kind of gender binary divide. I think those type of investigations are interesting, but from gender research for the last decade or so, we know that gender is connected to a more diverse set of identities. So to talk about male and female in binary terms actually blur or marginalize all types of gender identities that we can speak about and that people embody and that people are also identify with. So in my research, I instead talk about masculinities as coming out of the 20 years recent studies within gender scholarship, and then especially masculinity studies. And I've sent you beforehand a couple of articles, both in Russian, German, Swedish, English, and I hope that some of them can be of interest and also connect to your lived reality, since I do think it's quite important to read about these issues in your own language and be able to kind of think about this type of research in connection to your own lived reality, so to speak. Yes, but just to show off then a bit more, the books that we have just published is, first of all, this Ecological Masculinities, which is a monograph trying to, or not only trying to, but actually doing both a summary of the research within masculinity studies and ecofeminisms in connection to environmental issues. So we bring together there the state-of-the-art research and also then propose a framework in which we are to be able to understand masculinities in connection to environmental and energy and climate issues. So in this book, Ecological Masculinities, we propose the framework of understanding this in connection to three conceptualizations or configurations in which bodies and structures is understood to be interlinked. And the first masculinities that we have identified in empirical research is what we call industrial breadwinner masculinities. This is a way to behave and do your gender identity, which has been extremely influential in the fossil-fueled industrial modern society from the end of the 19th century up until the time that we are living in. So this way of doing and being yourself is connected to the extractivism of fossil fuels, for example. So working in the coal mines or setting up your company and extracting fossil fuels is very much connected to this way of understanding the nature as only a resource to be extracted and used by humans. And this has been and is very much a manly practices, mostly men with this type of Poland, for example, the coal regions in Poland, we can see it in connection to workers on oil fields and those kind of in connection to regions like Appalachia in the US. But this way of having your identity as an industrial breadwinner masculinities is not only connected to these type of workplaces, but also connected to industries which are heavily reliant on fossil fuels today. So connected to mining, for example, with heavy machinery, and connected to cement industry and also automobile industry, in which similar values are also kind of performed. And this industrial breadwinner masculinities does pose a problem for us today, not least to the knowledge of climate science, because climate science tells us that this type of extractivism, this type of use of fossil fuels, could no longer be done in the same way as in the industrial modern society. And the groups of individuals who perform these industrial breadwinner masculinities norms and are part of these type of structures, they tend to not take climate science warnings into account. So they tend to spread doubts and spread misinformation regarding climate science. So this is where we start in this book with analyzing the complex problem of how masculinities are tied into and part of the environmental challenges that we see today. Then we move from that to a form of masculinities we call eco-modern. So the eco-modern masculinities, they take into account the challenges and the science that we are in a very severe situation as humanity, and we need to do something. But the solutions are not system change, so changing the whole system into something else. Their solutions are very much end of pipe technology solutions. So only taking into account the emissions that comes from this system here and trying to find technologies that will take away those emissions and conserve or keep the system, the fossil fuel industrial modern system intact, so to speak. Myself, I've studied this in the most visual way with technologies like hydrogen and fuel cells technologies that would do exactly this, take away the emissions from the system, but not change the system, the transport system. And this makes up a problem because we know that the transport system as a whole is dependent on fossil fuels. So this is only turning into more or less a greenwashed solution. It is presented as very green, you take away the emissions, but you keep the system as it is. And then in this book, we are also then trying to understand and propose how we can transform masculinities into what we call ecological masculinities, ways of being in which we take into account these crucial ideas that we are interconnected with the ecosystems. We are over 60% water in our bodies. We breathe the air and the oxygen that the plants provide to us. We are interlinked with the ecosystems that we are at the same time destroying. And how can we re-understand and re-practice that interlinkages with the nature and not separate ourselves from nature again, which is very much what the industrial breadwinner masculinities are doing then. So here comes practices and ideas of ecological masculinities, both to understand that we are part of the problem and deeply also recognize that we need to do something about it, and we need to find new practices of being gender identities in which we could have these type of relationships in a much more lively, fruitful, and vibrant way, both the nature within ourselves the nature outside of us, in which we are connected with. Okay, so that was a short kind of summary of the theories of masculinities that I and Paul Pulley have proposed in this book. And then we have just published an anthology on the subject called Men, Masculinities and Earth, Contending with the Manthropocene, a book in which we collect the state-of-the-art research in this field together with 22 other contributors. So we are trying to bring the best of knowledge together here in this anthology and showcase it, but also trying to bring that knowledge and the research further, so to speak. So that was a bit of a background of me, my kind of journey into this subject, what I do now, and also some very short glimpses of the research that I've done. And I really hope that you have managed to at least get a glimpse on some of the papers that I sent out, or maybe you can read those afterwards. Because now my aim is to transition into more of a conversation and dialogue with you, because my experience is that the type of analysis and the type of proposals that I have of how to understand the society and our identities and how that is connected always comes with quite a few reactions and some curiosity. And I'm always curious about those questions, since this is a kind of new research field, and it is important to kind of get to know how is this, how does an audience like you take this into account, or what kind of ideas that comes to your mind when you hear this type of analysis. So as a starting question, I would like you to just take 30 seconds. Maybe you can turn off your screen, relax a bit, but think about, okay, so what does this research stir in you? What kind of comes to your mind when you think about this research? So just take briefly 30 seconds and just relax and just let it sink in and just think about that. So maybe you can turn off your screen just 30 seconds. Okay, welcome back. And I'm looking forward to hear your reflections and questions. And since I don't know you, I would love to hear just very, very shortly from those who pose a question or reaction, where you're from and what you're doing. Just 10 seconds or something. Okay. The floor is yours.
Yes, I raised my hand.
Yeah. I can see Niels raised your hand there. Yes.
Yeah, I guess I can start if that's okay with everyone. So yes, Niels Höglund, I work for CCB, or at the CCB Secretariat in Uppsala right now. And I have been in and out of this, so to speak, subject a little bit. I know quite a lot about ecofeminism and the backgrounds of deep ecology. I mean, I've been in environmental ethics and been touching on the subject like scholastically and also professionally off and on. But also considering what you now said, summarized a little bit of the books and the themes. One thing that I kind of think of very often is this going even further behind or further back in why these masculinities or masculine power structures fight to preserve it. I mean, that's the question. And going back to our previous, I don't know if you heard the previous presentation regarding theory of change. Okay, but you might be familiar with the concept. I mean, what it is that we theoreticize about, okay, what can we do to change that situation? And it feels like what we have behind here is people that are scared losing power. They are preserving, in a way, they are conserving the old because of conserving it. They are just what we traditionally in politics call conservatives. So there's that, and what do you need to exchange in them for having them to change? And when I say those words, and when we talk about this, I quite often think about religion. I think about the fact that we had in the north here, we had a very powerful religion and social structure back in what we call the Viking era, but that's slightly a misconception. But anyway, the Viking era. And in a very quick and short time period, that was exchanged for something else. In a way, I see these things almost like that. You know, there needs to be an offer of something better or something greater or something more comfortable or something more fluffy or nice or something that you can relate to or want. The problem of that change, as I see it, is that women, men, they had a fairly, you know, some parts of the standing that women had back in those days was actually a lot stronger than they got under the Christian hat, so to speak. So the shift, in a way, gave way to this massive masculinity thing. Now we're asking or trying to shift back, and also hearing you talking about some of these things, the words a lot of people talk about sounds very, it almost sounds religious. We're connected to nature, we're one, you know. So this is where I am, Martin. It feels like almost a religious-like discussion, but with this power core of, I'm giving up something, I want something else in return, otherwise I'm not going to change. And then reflecting back to us as NGOs, how can we make that change even possible? I mean, we're talking, deeply rooted things. So it is an enormous struggle, but the gender focus, I feel, is really interesting one, but I can't handle it. It's just, I regress back to saying, okay, the Pope, we need help from the Pope here. I don't know. Sorry, that was very long, but these are really things that also now come to me, this religious link and these things and how, thanks, sorry,
Thank you very much. I totally connect in those type of reflections, and I recognize that you are knowledgeable because, the ecofeminist, like Carolyn Merchant, her famous book, The Death of Nature, for example, and others have really connected the Christianity and the idea of patriarchy and the diminishing role of women within that religious system, also to the death of nature, so to speak. That at the same time as women got a lower status below men, nature also got the same status in below humans, and that was codified into Christianity's idea of God letting humans be the so-called caretaker of the earth, so to speak, and then codify that into to man being that person, so to speak, or that group. So definitely, ecofeminist has pointed towards Christianity as one of the problems here. I can relate to that because I now, as a non-religious person, actually work quite closely with Swedish Church on spiritual issues, because they have recognized this failure themselves. So they have recognized that they have cut the ties with nature. So they are working with ideas now at the core of the Swedish Church. They work with ideas of rights of nature, naturens rättigheter in Swedish, rights of nature. So this is not a book of mine, written together with Nicholas Berg and Ingrid Berg. And the Christianity in Sweden, at least, trying to reconnect to nature through ideas of that nature has intrinsic rights and intrinsic things to contribute to humans. We are linked to those ecosystems, and the Swedish Church cannot continue with their forestry, for example, in which they just cut down massively the forest, because if they would implement these type of ideas. So something here is actually happening in the Swedish Church, which I find at least quite exciting, because it is in Sweden the biggest organization we have, with 5.5 million members or something like that. Not, yeah, you know, the Swedish Nils, but so that's interesting. Another thing, how can we make the change that we need? The theory of change here is, yes, it's really, really important. So here on this issue, I work also with civil society and work with an organization called Men for Gender Equality in Sweden. So we have, during the 6 last years, tested and put in place a curriculum, a course that is named Men in the Climate Crisis. And we have pursued that around 15 times now, and we are evaluating that continuously, and we are fine-tuning it and developing it. And this is possible for all types of organization to take on board. It consists of, for now, 8 sessions, and we use the theory of change connected to what's called U-learning. And U-learning is a pedagogy that recognizes that learning is not going in a linear way, and it's not only about knowledge in kind of one silos like that. So, and then you come up again with the new knowledge, but U-learning or U-pedagogy is like a U. So you start over here with a position and identity and ideas, and then you go very, very deep into this, very deep into the U. So you go down here, and down here it's very, very, very challenging. So down here you question what you're doing, and you talk about your own practices and your own mistakes, and in a safe space, so to speak. And then you turn up through the U and come up on another position. So you start in one position with the pedagogue, and then you come out at another place. We have evaluated this, and we have tested it, and we have another chapter. It's a lot of chapters. It's a lot of writings when you're a researcher. But I don't know if I attach this to you, but this is actually an open access one. It's this chapter, When Gender Equality and Earth Care Meet, Ecological Masculinities in Practice. And it's in this book, Gender, Intersectionality and Climate Institutions. And in that chapter, we evaluate this and discuss this type of pedagogy. And it is possible to bring about. And Men for Gender Equality, they are also doing this education in Russian. So they have a project in Russia that they have done this education there. And it's also translated into English. So it's Swedish, English, and Russian. Okay, that was a bit of a long answer, but you touched upon very important aspects here. And I'm maybe inspired by my engineering colleagues at Chalmers. I'm also very interested in solutions, because I think we need to bring all this knowledge to actually have ideas of transformations. We as social scientists and humanities scholars and social movements and the type of organization that you are, we cannot only be critical on the state, on the situation that we're in. We need to think about how we change, how we transform. Yes, okay, more questions and reflections.
Yeah, there was a, Camilla, you take the written question there?
Yeah, there is a question in the chat. Maybe I can ask Julia to say it
yeah,
loud.
I just translated it already here. So the question was if you have studied countries where we had a former communist system, or only in Christian ones. I assume that means the Catholic or Protestant church. That was the question, I guess, related to the discussion we just now had. And yeah, so if you can reflect on that, maybe, Martin.
Yeah, not so much, I must say. The research that underpins this book is mainly, gender and environmental research is mainly done, the first 15, 20 years, it was done very much focused on the global south. So countries in Asia and Africa and South America, because the focus was on countries that was kind of used by the West for resource use, and the same thing was happening to the women there. But of lately, there's come much more research on the global north as well, but I know very little research in the former what's called the eastern countries, or what we have done in collaboration with Men for Gender Equality is a survey in Russia, and what very briefly the results there, they I can connect you to the researchers that has done that type of research. But the research shows there that in Russia, there's this gender divide, or this idea of only two possibilities of having gender identities, men and women, are stronger. So, and also the connection to certain values, which can be understood as industrial breadwinner, are connected much stronger to those who describe themselves as having a male identity in Russia. But there are some signs that also males in Russia are questioning this type of identity, and environmental issues comes through. So there are signs of change. We can see that in that survey as well. But actually, that's the kind of only research that I've done, and there's been done very little research overall. I'm part of the editor committee for this series, Routledge Studies in Gender and Environment, and we are actually, as editors of that series, looking for research from Russia and Poland and other countries, like Ukraine and Belarus and other countries. So if you have suggestions, just tell me, and please also send me research if you know of any. Yeah.
Still, in the situation you just described, where these things are much stronger, and my kind of sad maybe feeling is just that we basically just need time to pass. We can do maybe what we can to question, but you also know that there's a counter movement in these countries, almost aggressively defending old power structures and masculinity. I mean, look at Putin himself showing off these photos, this old fat guy, I guess he is almost now these days, but whatever, is like, yeah, with guns and whatever. I mean, they're like celebrating this thing, and to crack that down or to address that, we become, as NGOs or civil society or whatever, we become targets of, well, ridicule, aggression, threats, all kinds of things, because we're challenging this super powerful norm. So I think that results in that we avoid it. We don't challenge it. We try different ways, but so again, in that setting, you spoke about the global south, for example. Of course, they had the same, or probably still have, but maybe they have evolved. So is the simple answer to, in a way, my question, we just need time, or we have to try, but it takes time? Or what do you say to that? I mean, it's sort of, we're in the changing business. That's what we try to do. So
yeah, another really good question. Because we know that we don't really have that time. If we think about the knowledge from the climate science, we know that we need to bring down our emissions in Sweden, and we are kind of quite not that bad. We need to bring it down with 8 to 10% per year, and this was what we did the last year when the pandemic stopped us from flying and traveling with car. And we know that we need to stop extracting oil, gas, and coal, which, as you pointed out, in Russia, for example, is the main kind of the bulk income, so to change masculine norms and behaviors is, for me, only kind of one side of the coin, so to speak. The other side is that we need to find very, very, very effective ways to change the influence of the industrial modern industries, and especially the fossil fuel industries, and those countries totally depending on it. And that's a huge challenge. And there's a lot of different types of answers to that. One idea which I have just gotten to know about is the fossil fuel, the idea of a fossil fuel disarmament treatment. So the treatment that is take the inspiration and the ideas from a nuclear disarmament treatment, and trying to apply that for fossil fuel industries disarmament, so to speak, because we who knows the research, we who know where we are, we know that this is what needs to be done. If we are to stop use fossil fuels within just 15, 20 or 30 years, which the climate science tells us, and the UN Secretary of State said on the basis of IPCC report just recently. Of course, just trying to work with education and the idea of change regarding masculinities is not nearly enough. So that's only one side of the coin. In this book, Visions for a Post-COVID World, I published an article called Moving Beyond Climate Change Denial. And in addition to changing masculinities norms here and education, I propose this idea of having a third crime against humanity, in which companies and responsible politicians can actually put into trial at the International Court in Hague. You know, after the Nuremberg trials and after the Nazis in Germany, the judges and societies said that enough is enough. We need to find ways to protect the intrinsic values of humanity. So we need to have crimes, and we need to have a court in which crimes against humanity can be tried, so to speak. And the outcome of that is the International Court in Hague, in which criminals from the Balkan War, for example, has put on trial for crimes against humanity. And when that court was set up, the fifth crimes against humanity was on the agenda. The crime that if corporations and countries or individuals destroyed large ecosystems, they could be put on trial. But this fifth crime, the crime of ecocide, it's called, was dismissed, or it was brushed away. And research shows now that this was done by countries depending on their oil industry. So the Netherlands and the UK and the US were some of the leading countries that would not like to include this crime of ecocide. And I think, and my judgment is, that we need to have those type of criminalization of large-scale destruction of ecosystems as a moral shift that could maybe also change the way in which we understand ourselves as humans, understands our way of using the resources that we have around us. So these are two of my solutions that comes out of my analysis, changing masculinities, norms and practices, and the kind of institutions that they also embody, and at the same time also changing the morals and the way in which you understand the misuse of nature of today, and criminalize large-scale environmental destructions like ecocide. So yes, Niels, we need to move rapidly. We need to have a theory of change that can actually accelerate the change, and finding leverages, finding the large change mechanism. And if we then can concentrate the energy that we have into those leverages or large changes, we might also make the big change happen. But we need to come together strongly on a couple of those leverages to actually make change possible that we need. Yeah, those are my thoughts.